Hello there all you absolutely magnificent people, and welcome back to another episode of An Ecologist Plays, where we talk about nature while playing games. My name is Will, and as you can see we are back in Empires of the Undergrowth, where the Formica Ereptor ants are spreading across South America. So let's have a look at them, shall we? We're going back into the remix missions. This time around we are going to do Frontline, because, well, the army ants are coming, and we as the Formica Ereptor ants have to do our best to push them back. Of course, as in the previous mission, we can only choose leafcutter ants, so we are forced to use the workers here. This time around, however, we are going to use the workers because we did encounter them in the previous mission. However, we are not going to be using the leafcutters. Instead, we are going to go with the Formica rufas again, and again going for the rapid fires. And this time around, we are going to be using the slave maker ant soldiers. That is what we are going to also use. These ones will be our main melee. The wood ants will be our main ranged attacks, and then the workers here, they are just going to collect the food for us and do some stuff around the colony itself. Alright, but that is it, so let's jump right in, shall we? Spreading deeper into the South American jungles, our Formica Ereptor ants have come across another empty leafcutter ant nest. Abandoned a few months ago for no apparent reason, this is the perfect place for the Formica Ereptors to make a nest. However, unbeknownst to them, there's a reason this nest is empty. It fell victim to the army ants that came through this area a few months ago. And now, it is time for them to make another pass. Will this colony survive, or will it fall by the wayside when the army ants come marching through? Since we don't need the media workers, we have removed them. We're not using them in this mission. Instead, we will be placing down some Formica rufas, which are going to be our ranged soldiers. And as always, we are just going to build our refuge area over here so that our minims can just dump all the waste over there. And our workers are just immediately going to start gathering some leaves. And encountering our first rove beetle larva, our Formica rufas here are just showing why they are such an important part of this colony. Dawn breaks and the jungle stirs as the army ants are getting ready to vacate their bivouac. They've made a temporary shelter somewhere nearby, and the first scouts are ready to depart from their nest. Our Formica Ereptors, on the other hand, are just minding their own business for now, excavating their nest, getting ready to defend it against things like the juvenile whip spider that has been unearthed. Again, no match for the Formica Ereptors. And now, of course, having successfully dealt with that threat, the Formica Ereptors are making their way into the jungle to start collecting leaves. Soon a trickle becomes a torrent as the army ants are marching forth. From their bivouac, they will catch, kill and dismember any prey they find, and carry back the spoils of war to their bivouac, a temporary shelter consisting not of dirt and stone, but of the living bodies of their sisters. Working together, our sisters very quickly excavate the two rove beetle larvae here. In this excavated area, the colony is going to produce a few more brood chambers. The open plan of this nest helps the minims to move very quickly from one area to another, carrying leaves from the leaf storage to the different chambers where the fungi are being cultivated, and also allows them to very quickly move waste from the brood chambers away to the refuse dump, which is located away from the brood chambers. However, excavations also uncovered a wonderful little velvet worm, a small one, but still potent enough and able to trap some of our sisters here in a very, very sticky slime. However, no match for the Formica Ereptors. Dusk falls and the last of the army ants are taking their spoils of war back to their bivouac. Tomorrow is another day, and these ants will most likely push harder and closer to the Formica Ereptor colony. Our ants have to work hard to get as many leaves as possible in their nest to support the fungal colony that fuels this engine. As the Formica Ereptors prepare for war against the army ants, they also start hatching their first Formica sanguinea ants, the slave makers. These ants do not have the ranged attacks of their distant cousins, the wood ants, but they can be strong, especially when paired with the ranged attacks of their distant relatives. As dawn breaks, the army ants emerge once more. Having spent the night in their bivouac, they are ready to take on whatever comes their way. Initially, just a few velvet worms, they are ripped apart and carried back to the nest, but soon mantises and jumping spiders and larger prey will fall before them. The Formica Ereptors must tread carefully. Unfortunately, their path crosses with the army ants and they come to blows. Luckily, the Formica Ereptors have the wood ants at their disposal and are able to quite quickly persuade the army ants from not pursuing this particular colony at this point in time. It will, however, just be a matter of time before the army ants push ahead again, and so the Formica Ereptors set up a bottleneck where they attempt to stem the tide. Here they will make their stand. No army ants shall cross this border. Emboldened by the success of the initial stemming of the tide, the Formica Ereptors decide to attack along the marching column of the army ants. These ants, many times the size of some of the smaller workers of the Formica Ereptors, still do not stand a chance against the constant barrage of formic acid that the wood ants are bringing to bear. Eventually, after a fierce but almost one-sided attack, the army ants decide that perhaps they should stick to the more successful paths further to the west. But this is just the start of the problems for our Formica Ereptors, as hiding between some denser shrubs there is a leaf mimic mantis. This one is a large, fully grown individual, and it will not easily be persuaded from this area. Additionally, some army ant scouts have made their way past the Formica Ereptor lines and almost let the rest of the colony know that, listen, there are some nice Formica Ereptor ants to take. The leaf mimic mantis dwarves the Formica Ereptor ants, but stood no chance. Likewise, the large harvestman next to it also stood no chance. The Formica Ereptors are already showing that they are a formidable force in this jungle. Inside the nest, it is abuzz. The minim workers constantly shredding the leaves into smaller pieces and carrying it to the fungal gardens. This colony is definitely not starving. Using the extra food that this colony has, they are upgrading their slave maker ants, making them stronger and more formidable, and potentially a little bit better at withstanding the army ant invasion. Speaking of which, the army ants have decided that they will perhaps continue along this trail that they were chased away from previously. Formica Ereptors must again come to the fore and try to persuade the invaders from perhaps looking for food elsewhere. Now, normally the Formica Ereptors would now be using this opportunity to partake in a bit of kleptoparasitism, waiting for the army ants to carry their spoils of war back to the nest before attacking them and stealing the food particles and using it for their own. However, these Formica Ereptor ants have, perhaps due to the fact that they have taken on the genes of leafcutter ants, lost the ability to process animal food. Instead, they are wholly reliant on the fungus that they cultivate. And so the Formica Ereptors attacking the army ants as they make their way back to the bivouac is not to steal the food, but perhaps to just dissuade them from venturing through this area again. Because if they spend more energy than they are getting from raids in this general vicinity, perhaps they will go look for food elsewhere. But night is again falling, and this is now the opportunity the Formica Ereptors have been waiting for. It is time to gather more food without worrying about the army ant incursion into the area. The Formica Ereptors have picked up a strange scent on the wind. Something large, something almost alien. To the west of the Formica Ereptor nest, there is a massive whip spider. This arachnid, although called a whip spider, also sometimes called a tailless whip scorpion, is neither a true spider nor a scorpion. Instead, it is another arachnid altogether. With its raptorial or grasping pedipalps, this arachnid could make short work of any ant. However, the Formica Ereptors have numbers and ranged attacks on their side, and perhaps they will be able to take on this massive whip spider. Emboldened by the numbers, they make their way to the whip spider. This is going to be a massive endeavor. Spraying formic acid into the wounds created by the melee soldiers, the ranged attackers rain down hell upon this whip spider. Using its long antennae-like forelimbs, the whip spider tries to determine where all the ants are. However, it is too late, and there are already many of them on its back, stinging, biting, trying to get an opening, trying to find a weakness in the armor. And as they do so, the ranged attacks of the wood ants continue to rain down on the whip spider. Despite heavy losses, the Formica Ereptors have indeed won this battle, and the leaves of the plants growing here, where the whip spider once hid, are now theirs for the taking. Truly, the Ereptors are proving to be a far greater threat to the ecosystem than anyone anticipated. The forest has gone quiet. Too quiet. The insects of the forest have stopped calling. In its place there is a strange chitter of a billion little legs tippy-tapping on the leaf litter. The army ants are coming. The first to emerge are the majors, trying to force their way through the jungle, and followed shortly by the media and minor workers. This is it. It is time for the Formica Ereptors to push ahead and attempt to force the army ants back once more. If the army ants can break through here, they will very easily start making their way to the Formica Ereptor nest. However, the Formica Ereptors have put up a fight, and they have, in fact, driven back the army ants. One lone army ant scout attempts to flee, however, it was taken out by the Formica Ereptors. Now it is just a matter of the main column of the army ants. If the Formica Ereptors can drive this column back, the army ants will surely be forced to go look for food elsewhere. Being a highly nomadic species, the army ants do not stay in one area for long. Instead, they gather food quickly in an area by sending out these raids from their central bivouac and remain in an area for a few days to at most 3 weeks, whereafter they will move on to another part of the forest. As a result, they need large areas in order to actually function and do their thing. And with habitat fragmentation due to deforestation, large areas capable of supporting these massive ants are becoming fewer and further between. And as a result, the ecosystem is losing one of its most important components. Because although the army ants seem like a menace, and surely to any ant nest caught in their path, they do appear to be such, they fulfill a very, very important role. By constantly doing raids through large parts of the forest, they prevent any one group of insect from dominating the landscape. Instead, the most common species are also most likely going to be the ones that are attacked most frequently and taken out most frequently by the army ants. Rarer species and species that are adapted to not be aggressive and not take out any other species in the area are more likely to persist. And if these ants were to be completely lost from the system, the ecosystem would surely start falling apart. But well, the Formica Ereptors have done something. They have taken out the army ants, forced them from this area. These army ants will now go look for food elsewhere, most likely packing up their bivouac and making their way to another part of the forest, from where they can set up raids. But a rumor has reached me of another colony of Formica Ereptors that have started setting up a colony somewhere in North America, another area they don't belong. So come and join me next week as we go find out what is happening in the swamps of North America. Until then, have a lovely week further, everybody. I will see you all soon. Cheers.